Murder on the Church House Steps, written by Iris Culver Meadows, narrated by Laura Meadows. Only 5 family members remained in the little log cabin at the end of the woodland trail, sometimes referred to as a road. Although Clip stayed in his own cabin at brief intervals, the long, hard winter had passed, with illnesses it had brought, and now it seemed the family could look forward to a pleasant, happy life. School was out for the summer, and the vegetable garden had sprung up with a vigor that promised an abundance of food for a long time. There were milk cows and a flock of laying hens. There weren't any luxuries, but none were expected. The family gathered into a lean-to, a long, narrow room attached and running the length of the cabin on the west side. This small structure had 2 doors, directly opposite of which were windows in the middle of board walls. One of the doors had steps down from the center of the log cabin to the board floor of the lean-to, and the other door, at this time standing open and half concealing large tin cans filled with molasses, gave a view of the north 20. Near the south end of the lean-to was the kitchen stove, which faced a tall safe used for storing food and utensils. Seated at the table, which was pushed up under the open west window, were Dad, Clip, and Newt. Cricket was tending to the stove, and Jenny was standing to the left of her father, watching his every move. She had finished her mush and milk, which they always had for supper, a fare she never questioned, for she assumed that everyone, everywhere, had cornmeal mush and milk for supper. On this June evening, 1932, something happened outside the cabin that changed their lives forever. Crack, crack, whipped through the air. Dad froze motionless, staring out the window, through which the sound had come. In a moment, he shook violently, slushing the gruel over the side of his spoon onto the table oilcloth. Again, crack, crack came from the west, followed by erratic popping noises. What was that? Dad asked, slightly above a whisper. Oh, that's just some firecrackers, Clip replied. Always glad to pour oil on troubled waters. He knew it sounded like guns, but he was trying to calm his father's fears, and probably some of his own. It's not long till the 4th of July, and you know how everybody likes to start celebrating early, Clip explained further. Jenny wondered why Dad was so upset over a little noise, but she soon forgot the matter and got ready to go to the church. Shortly afterwards, Cricket, Newt, and Jenny were walking through the woods down the same path that led to the school, for the same building was used for both school and church. The sun had dipped into the treetops ahead of them, making the forest shady and dark. Soon they emerged and started picking their way through the cane patch in Clip's 20. Over the heads of the rows of green shoots they saw a curious sight. A pail of red dust that gathered its color from the setting sun lay over the road that ran between them and the church house. Wagons and cars were pulling out of the churchyard and leaving. It was almost time for the meeting to start, and they were going home. Jenny thought silently about this strange sight, but said nothing. When they neared the road, a neighbor walked towards them from the church. There wouldn't be any meeting tonight, he began. A man's been shot. He stopped, not knowing what to say to the children. He's still alive. He's been taken to Springfield to the hospital right now. Who was it? Newt asked. Cricket and Jenny stared in shocked silence. I'm sorry. It's your brother Emmett. The man, visibly shaken, bit his lip and looked frowning down at the ground. You don't know how sorry I am to have to tell you this, but somebody had to, this being your brother and all. I know how you feel. He tried to comfort the children, who by now had started to cry. He's still alive, and there's hope. Don't give up hope. There, he said gently, as he laid his hand on Newt's shoulder. We just have to believe he'll get all right and be back home soon. He comforted the children as much as he could. Margaret has gone to get your dad to take him to Springfield, too. There's nothing for you to do here. You better go on back home. The children looked at each other in silence, and then turned and began their journey home with 1,000 unanswered questions and no one to talk to. The woods had never been so dark. The owls had never screeched louder, and the whippoorwill had never cried more plaintively. All of the dreary night seemed to be in mourning. Dad was gone when the children got back to the cabin. It looked as if he left in a hurry. The room was in a jumble. Cricket found her way in the moonlight, which was peeping through the clouds, and in a moment was able to light the lamp. "I should have washed that globe," she said, as a way of distracting them all from the sad thing that had just happened. There was no response. After a while, they began to talk to each other, and just at that time, Clip came home. "You heard?" Clip said as he swung open the heavy wooden door. The children nodded in assent. "I found out some more about it, but not a lot." "Why? What was it all about?" Newt asked. "I don't know why," Clip said, seating himself on the edge of the bed. "But why the guns?" "Why the guns?" Jenny cried. "Well, he was pretty handy with his fists," Clip replied. "The only thing I know is Emmett and Robert Baker were settin' in front of the steps when a gang come running up from behind the church, shooting as they ran. Emmett and Robert jumped up and started running the other way, round the other side of the back with the gang after 'em. Robert was ahead and got over the fence and kept on running. Emmett jumped over the fence and fell on the ground and just laid there. The gang left him for dead and kept on chasing Robert. The only thing in sight was the pond and that brush around it, so Robert headed for the pond. They caught up with him and stomped him in the mud, face down. People started coming to the church, and the gang ran away. Robert's all right, though." Clip stopped and held his head in his hands, and he tried to hold back the tears that began to flow. "Wilbur, and he's the one that told me about it, said when he got to him, the only thing Emmett said was, 'I'm all shot to pieces.'" Clip could not go on, and for a long time there was only a numb silence in the room. "Do you think Daddy'll be back tonight?" Cricket asked tearfully. "No, I don't think so, because Springfield is a long way off," Clip answered. "Is Emmett going to live?" Newt asked. "Nobody seems to know about that. That's what I was trying to find out. The only thing anybody wanted to say was that they hoped he would." "I don't understand it. I don't understand it all," Jenny moaned. She lay down on her bed, and it wasn't long before the tiring day put her to sleep. Dad did not come home the next day, but in the following morning he gave up the vigil at the bedside of his unconscious son. The doctor had told him there was nothing for him to do but wait, and he could do that more comfortably at home. To the children waiting there eagerly for him, he explained that whatever happened to Emmett now would be in God's will. Dad went about his usual long work day, leaving the house before daylight and returning home after dark. Every day while the children were home alone, neighbor boys came by to give them the latest news about Emmett. Telephones were scarce, and those fortunate few who had them helped the rest of the community as well. One morning the children saw 3 messenger boys approaching the cabin. Newt went to meet them. Cricket soon caught up with him, but Jenny stood waiting some distance away. The visitors spoke briefly and left. The result was that the 2 older children started crying. Jenny had heard a few words, unintelligible sounds that carried no meaning. She heard, but did not understand. Seeing her puzzled look, Newt explained, "He's dead. Emmett is dead. He's not coming back again." This meaning sank in and released memories of a brother she felt she knew so little. Emmett had left home to go to work when she was very young, yet when he was around he had always taken her part whenever there was any kind of disagreement among the children. She liked him and was appreciative of his support and kindness. It was wonderful to have someone who trusted and believed in you. Now he was gone. At 23, he was dead, leaving a young widow, a tiny baby girl. Jenny couldn't understand. How could there be so much hate that men would take guns and kill a man? Her father's crazed grief could offer no explanation. "His blood is on their hands," he said over and over, seeming to find solace in the innocence of his son. From his faith in religion and the eternal life, he believed that his son was now safe in the hands of God. On the day of the funeral, the family gathered at the home of a friend who lived in the edge of town. Violet came from St. Louis and busied herself with the attire and appearance of her younger brothers and sisters. She placed Jenny on a tall stool and snipped off her scraggly long tresses to something like a boyish bob. After a while, the family friends left for church, and a long procession of cars, some borrowed, behind a square black hearse, until they had gone about 4 miles into the country northwest of the town. No lovelier place in the world could have been found to spend one's eternity than the little white church back in the old neighborhood. This sanctuary stood at the crest of a rolling hill and was completely surrounded by green trees. To add to the feeling of peace came the sound of the gentle lowing of cattle. Although the church was at the fork of a dirt road, there was little coming and going, just enough to stave off a feeling of total isolation. It was a very old church, possibly having survived 60 or 70 years. From its perch on a high concrete platform, it looked out on the world with a series of tall, pointed, clear glass windows at the side of its single narrow room. One entered from a small foyer at the top of a steep climb of stairs and emerged into a long aisle which ran down the center of the road. On both sides of this aisle sat rigid pews, so close together that the church seemed to have been built for a diminutive race of people. At the far end of the front of the church was a raised platform, which accommodated the minister's lecture, a piano, and a group of chairs for the choir. In front of this platform, his coffin, open for all to see, lay Jenny's brother Emmett. Flowers rested in the coffin and on stands nearby, sending their lovingly fragrance throughout the church. Following the funeral service, the back pews emptied first as people walked down the center aisle past the coffin and went on out a nearby door to wait in the churchyard. The family then rose from the front pews and lingered before the coffin. Once outside in the churchyard, Jenny, who stayed close to her father, was relieved to see that his grief had subsided. However, as friends and former neighbors came to offer words of solace, he broke out into inconsolable sobs. This led Jenny to conclude, in her unfamiliarity with such things, that everyone should leave him alone because he was doing better by himself. People were making him cry, she thought. How she wished they would stay away. But who can know the grief in a father's heart? At the back of the church building, immediately behind a tall wrought iron fence, were the prominent headstones of their mother's Culver family, for this was the neighborhood where Jenny and her family had previously lived. And to the left was a plot where their mother and 4 brothers lay. 3 of them were mere infants. Nearby was a fresh mound of dirt by an open grave for yet another brother. In the weeks that followed, Dad, in his melancholy state, came to the conclusion that it would be in the best interest of the children if he simply gave up trying to take care of them and sent them all away.